Good news, Leafs fans, you've been saved. Well, maybe anyway. As you probably already know by now, late last week the NHLPA voted to move forward with plans for a 2014 playoff and a return to hockey, which I did already make a video about, but since the NHL on Tuesday came out with an official announcement of the plan and included some pretty major decisions on details that were left up in the air last time, I thought I would give you an update on what those details are and how this is all shaping up. They announced a multi-phase plan, the first phase of which is an extended self-quarantine time for all of the players. A phase that will last until at least early June, if not longer. The big news here is that the regular season is officially over. So for the 7 teams who didn't make this 2014 playoff, their 2019-2020 season is now over. And the other piece of big news that came with this first phase was that the NHL will be spending this time to select 2 cities to serve as hubs for these playoffs. And we did also get a list of the cities they are considering as potential hubs. But with BC already saying that they aren't going to make any exceptions in their quarantine rules for the NHL, it seems like Vancouver is probably out. And with the NBA seeming to get closer to getting something done with Disney as far as helping to get their playoffs back, it seems like Vegas is probably the best option for one of these 2 cities. Now, granted, the 2-city format and the end to the regular season were both things that we kind of assumed after last week's announcement, but we do now officially know that that is what we're moving forward with. Moving on to Phase 2 though, while we don't have any hard dates for any part of their plan moving forward, the closest we have is the early June hopeful start for Phase 2, which is the time the NHL has set aside for the teams to gather their players in small groups at team facilities in order to train and have non-contact practices. Now, as entering Phase 2 will be the first real tangible step forward into actually getting hockey back, this was the part that was most well detailed, outside of obviously a hard date for when it'll start, in their plan. And I'm not going to go too much into the details on that, but if you do want to know more about those, I'll put a link below to some of the key points of this plan. Now, it does also seem like they're using Phase 2 as a kind of testing the waters in order to see if it's even realistic to come back to hockey and if they can do it safely right now. And I say that because it isn't until Phase 3 that they're actually going to start allowing teams to hold training camps like you would see at the start of a regular season. And they did say that the earliest that they would be starting Phase 3 would be the first half of July, which is about a month after they would potentially be starting Phase 2. And that all gets us to Phase 4 and finally playing some hockey. Now, I do have a confession to make. Part of the reason I wanted to do an update video was because of my last one, I accidentally got Colorado and Dallas switched up in the bracket, and as a result mistakenly said that if Edmonton were to win, they would play the Avalanche, and if the Wild were to win, they would go and play the Stars. Fortunately for me though, none of that matters now, because the biggest part of the Phase 4 news that we got was that the games that will be played between the top 4 seeds while the play-in games are happening will actually matter for seeding. And although each of these teams will play 3 games in a round-robin style of format rather than the tournament style that was suggested before, it does mean that all of those matchups that I mistakenly talked about last time could still very well happen. One of the most common reactions I've seen, and probably the most obvious reaction that you have right away when you hear that these games are going to matter for seeding, is how much this screws over the top seeds, and especially Boston. And I will say that to some extent it definitely does, but all things considered, I don't know that it does quite as much as people are making it out to. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that with an 8-point lead and 12 games to go, Boston was probably going to get the top seed in the East. And if they're coming into these playoffs fresh off of the end of the season, even as it was, I do think it would be a pretty big slap in the face to what they did during the regular season to make them play to prove that seed. But as it is, they aren't going to start playing these games until 4.5 months after the last time that they played meaningful hockey. And even if it is hard to prove objectively, I think there is something to be said for the fact that these games are going to actually matter for something. There will never be any way to know for sure, but I think it's entirely possible that even for these top-seeded teams, with the extent of a break that we've had, if these games were just exhibition games, they could be at just as much of a disadvantage playing against a team that's coming off of a 5-game elimination series as they could potentially be losing a spot or 2 in the seedings due to this round robin. So yes, the top seeds will risk maybe moving down a notch or 2 in the seeding, but they will have played meaningful hockey, which could be just as important. But at least as far as concrete advantages go, their regular season standing will matter when it comes to a potential tiebreaker if a couple of teams were to finish with the same record after the round-robin games. So for the Bruins and Blues, the only way they could fall to a 4 seed would be to go 0-3 in those round-robin games, and even if they were to go 2-1, it's still very likely that they still end up with that 1 seed. And similarly, the Flyers and Stars would have to win all 3 games in order to take the 1 seed. So with that decided and confirmation that the play-in round for all the other teams will be a best-of-5 series, the only big question left as far as formatting for these playoffs is concerned is whether or not there will be round-to-round reseeding. Now, selfishly, this is the second one of these brackets I've made now in a week, and if they did decide to do reseeding, it would all be for nothing, and I would have to make a whole new, even more complicated looking one to represent that. That being said, reseeding just makes more sense, and I don't really see a reason at this point why they wouldn't do it. The only reason I could have seen before for why they might not want to do reseeding is if they had decided to go with 4 hub cities over 2. Because with 4 cities, they would have been forced to split up the conferences, and then reseeding could mean that they would have to do some more traveling, which obviously they're going to avoid doing at all costs. But now that they've confirmed there will be just 2 hub cities, one for each conference, I don't see a reason that they wouldn't do reseeding, and honestly, I fully expect that the next announcement they make will be that there will be reseeding in these playoffs. Although I will say I wasn't expecting them to make the top seeds play to prove their seeds, so at this point, who knows. Now I do want to say that this is still not a for sure thing, and with a timetable that even at its most optimistic pushes games into August and probably even a couple into September, it still seems not unlikely that this might all get scrapped and we don't see playoffs at all. And while I certainly hope that that's not the case and that we do eventually get to see some hockey, like most people that still want to see hockey come back, I don't want to see it come back if it's not going to be done with safety as the absolute #1 priority. And finally, I had gone back and forth before making this video on whether or not I wanted to include my predictions on what I think the outcome of the round robin and the play-in round will be, but I'm going to save that for a later video. I will say this though, while the playoffs even in a normal year are often referred to as the second season in a hockey year, this year they truly will be a second season. And even in a normal year, the NHL playoffs tend to have the most parity when it comes to which seeds win round to round. And while the higher seed a team has, the farther they tend to make it, there still are teams from even the lowest seeds that end up going on to win the whole thing. And with what will be probably once again an almost 5-month break between regular season and playoffs this year, I can only expect that we will see even more chaos and an even harder to predict playoff than we usually do. So while I'm not going to say that each game is going to be a 50-50, for the people that are doing these tournaments by just flipping a coin for each game, you might not actually be that far off. But with that said, that will do it for me for now. So if you have made it this far, as always, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, hit the like button. If you really liked it and you want to see my predictions maybe later on, hit that subscribe button for me. If you want to share your thoughts on these playoffs or maybe what your predictions will be, feel free to share those down in the comments section below. Otherwise, I hope to see you next time and stay safe out there. Peace!